Okay, so today's Women Owning Woodland, which is our virtual lady landowner lunch. I call fall birds winter birds. So we're kind of in this transition period where some of our summer resident birds have left, like hummingbirds, for example. They've moved south for the winter, but then we have some birds that are actually moving into our area for the winter. And then we have some that are kind of year-round residents. So things like blue jays, cardinals, they're going to be here year-round. But I'm going to talk today a little bit about what you can do to prepare for winter birds. And so last year in particular, we had some concern. We never had any reports of it in Missouri, but in some other states around us, we had reports of like birds dying, and they had some concerns that it was linked to bird feeders or birds all being in common places. So I'll talk today a little bit about things that would kind of prevent disease. They've since they haven't actually ever found the cause of those bird deaths, and they have taken back. So they were giving out a recommendation kind of early summer not to feed birds, just to prevent birds from congregating in one area. But they've actually taken back that recommendation. So feeding birds is, back on the table. Just a quick, what is my Women Owning Woodland? So our program that we developed to provide learning opportunities for women landowners and woodland enthusiasts. We do field days, lunch and learns, classes, all geared towards women forest landowners and, again, woodland enthusiasts, so women that enjoy the outdoors. Facebook page that has some networking opportunities and just resources that are available. I don't know if anyone's on today that I've promised this to. We've talked about mushrooms a couple different times about cultivating mushrooms, and these logs had not really produced much, but they popped out some shiitake mushrooms last week after we got that rain, like right before Halloween weekend. It was enough moisture to kind of kick them in. So I had some shiitakes that popped up. So just for reference, what they look like. All right, so let's start talking first about our fall winter bird housekeeping. So this time of year, our martins and a lot of our other native wrens have, I'll talk about, there's a winter wren that moves in, but a lot of our summer wrens have moved out. So now is a good time to remove and clean martin houses and wren houses. Cleanliness is a good way to prevent spread of disease from year to year, give them kind of fresh nesting areas for the next year. It also keeps your houses from deteriorating too quickly. So there will be, of course, some damage to them over time, but it does help with that. If you haven't or don't have available, now's a good time to think about a fall or a winter water source. So many of us put away or empty out our bird baths this time of year because of freezing, and most bird baths are concrete. When the water freezes, and then it can cause damage. But if you have a different kind of water source available, so sometimes this is, putting in like a heater into the bird bath, perhaps a yard pond that we generally empty. Maybe we keep it open and add a heating source to it or a fountain to it to kind of keep it open more through the winter. This is one of the shortages that a lot of our winter residents lack, is water sources for a variety of species. So if you're looking to attract more than certain species of birds, if you'd like to have a lot of diversity at your feeders, consider putting up 3 different levels of bird feeders. So think about like some that are ground feeders. So, and you can think about bird feeders oftentimes. Even if we have a single bird feeder, there's some that spills to the ground, and there's usually certain species that like to eat off the ground, some that like to eat at the feeder. And then there's actually some that prefer like being kind of hidden in the trees. And those are good ones for like suet feeders. They kind of have those adaptations that let them kind of hang sideways on those. So having different levels of bird feeders can provide or increase the diversity that we have in our yard and that we're providing for. Another consideration is where you have your bird feeders. So sometimes if they're out in the open, which is great for us as bird watchers, but perhaps is not as secure feeling for birds. So we might limit our takers if it's kind of blatantly out in the open. So if we put it kind of the edge of woods, perhaps in a garden that we've left some shrubs in, or we've left some flower from this past summer. So like milkweeds or taller flowers, that can provide them a little bit of cover. And then just for fun and just sometimes of interest is to consider keeping a journal to note that first day for winter residents. So, and this is just, good citizen science, but also very interesting. I really enjoy looking back and seeing when things have changed or not changed. I've also found, interestingly enough, that Facebook is kind of an interesting form of diarying or journaling. Particularly this year, I found of interest going back and seeing like, oh my gosh, it was, October and this tree was already changing colors. And then this year we've had such a delayed autumn that it's been really interesting comparing which trees were changing color. But the same thing, happens with bird watching. So it's interesting to see when certain birds get here, when they perhaps leave. Say, I actually had, I hope was my last hummingbird just a week and a half ago, because we kind of have kept this warmer weather and we didn't cool off real fast. So again, just kind of interesting to note when we see these birds. Winter bird maintenance, you want to make sure, and a lot of people don't feed birds during the summer, and there's kind of advice that goes both ways on whether you should feed year round or not feed year round. But I can't really find any that definitively says one way or the other. I've seen, indications that if you feed during the winter, you should feed during the summer for your residents that have become dependent on bird feeders. But I would say that they find, despite using bird feeders, they still find enough other things that they eat on outside of bird feeders. But if you're starting up your winter bird feeding, we want to make sure bird food is fresh, free of insects or mites. We don't want any mold growing on it. So we want to make sure that we're feeding them very fresh food. This can be one way that diseases are spread or insects are spread. And also for your own kind of sake of your house and garage, there's been some instances of insects or mites being, kind of becoming a house nuisance because we got them through bird food. So you want to make sure that's fresh, free of those insects or mites. Consider spreading feeders out to prevent the spread of possible disease. Like I said, there was that kind of mystery disease that popped up late spring, early summer, and they discussed having so many birds at one feeder. Perhaps if you spread out and have different types of feeders in different parts of the yard, this will spread out your birds as well. Fresh water, if you keep water out, make sure that the container is cleaned regularly and the water is replaced. This, again, another source of disease, but also like poor water that can have contaminants in it if it is not cleaned regularly. And then last week we talked about pollinators overwintering, but also for the birds, if we consider leaving dead flowers or plants for birds for a source of food and shelter, this can also provide them good foraging area. So if you watch birds of a winter day, they will often make use of some of those insects that are hanging out in the leaves that we've left. So if we consider leaving some of that, that's a good source for birds. The other thing is that many of our natives, they will still have seeds available on them. So for example, coneflowers provide good food source for some of our finches that we see. So leaving that can provide, again, kind of an overwinter food source and shelter. If you're thinking about different ways or new ways to attract birds to your yard, perhaps you'd like to see more this winter, bird feeders. You can add some bird feeders, bird houses, even during the winter. Certain birds will use these for shelter. They won't use them for nesting, but they will use them for shelter. Keep your bird feeders and houses clean. So again, bringing your bird feeder in periodically for a good scrubbing is not a bad thing. So when it empties out, it's a good habit to bring it in and give it a little bit of a cleaning, particularly if it's plastic. Say wooden feeders are a little bit harder to clean, but perhaps just emptying those out and giving them kind of a brushing to keep all the dust and debris to a minimum is good. Another recommendation just in general for birds and bird populations is to keep cats indoors. Domestic cats are one of the #1 predators of birds. So keeping them indoors prevents them from from attacking your birds that you have in your yard. Not a winter habit, but a kind of a overall habit is landscaping with native plants. So in particular, like this time of year, a lot of our native hawthorns, our dogwoods, so gray dogwood, roughleaf dogwood, even flowering dogwood, they have their seeds on them, and this is a great food source as we're going into the winter. It's really high in protein for them. So using native plants provides one of those native food sources. I joke this kind of the theme for this month is keeping your yard a bit less tidy, but when we completely remove all the leaf debris, remove all the old flowers, we're taking a lot of insects and insect cover with it, which is a food source for birds. So allowing some of that stuff to stay through the winter provides a good food source. Another thing that happens oftentimes in winter is, and sometimes in summer from reflections, but is window strikes. So birds will actually run into the window because they don't see it, or perhaps they see the reflection of the trees in it, and it looks like they are flying into the trees and they're actually flying into a window. This is a good idea to put up silhouettes, and that gives them that depth perspective. Another good way to attract birds and to keep our bird populations healthy is to reduce pesticide use. Many of our birds will utilize insects as a food source, and if they have been treated with pesticides, this can cause long-term health effects for our bird population. Okay, and so I'm going to talk about several common birds that we'll see at the bird feeders and things we can do for these particular species, but just some knowledge about bird identification. So size and shape are good ways for us to identify birds. Color patterns tend to be distinct from bird to bird. It is important to note on color patterns that oftentimes a male bird will have a different or brighter color pattern than a female bird, but they will be of the same species. Bird behavior, so knowing where they hang out, what they eat, this can help with identification. And then habitat, same thing. So some of our birds are going to be more forest type, and some will prefer open grassland areas. And like I said, I pulled out some common ones that we see through the winter. So the first one's the red-breasted nuthatch. This one has a very short tail and a long pointed bill. They're blue-gray with that black cap on top and a stripe over the eye. This under part, I don't know if you'll be able to see my pointer, on males, it's going to be a really rich, rusty cinnamon color, and then paler on our females, like you see here. That's pretty much the distinction between them. They are a forest bird, so if you're looking to attract this one to your yard, having trees in your yard helps attract them to that. And they will be seed eaters through the winter. So these guys, we often find at the bird feeder during the winter, and then they are residents. So they'll stay through the summer, but they will generally not be at the bird feeder as often because they'll turn to a more insect-based diet over the summer. The next one, this is one of my favorites, a cedar waxwing. So these have this very distinct yellow tail band and kind of an interesting tuft on their head. They are oftentimes will actually migrate into Missouri this time of year and form flocks, and they are fruit eaters. So if you have any type of shrub that has late fall berries, and then they kind of go through the freeze process and become very palatable. So this includes like roughleaf dogwood, flowering dogwood, cedar trees. So they really like cedar berries, hawthorn berries. That's what these guys are attracted to. And oftentimes what you'll have is they don't stay in our yards for very long because they'll tend to form these flocks. So you might have a cedar tree in your yard. They'll come all at once and kind of clean that cedar of berries, and then the flock will move on. But they're a pretty fun winter bird that we have. And they also make a sound. It's kind of a high-pitched CEE sound that you would hear when they're present. The next one's a white-breasted nuthatch. So again, very compact bird, very similar to our red-breasted nuthatch. Biggest difference is that they have more of a whitish breast to them, hence the name white-breasted nuthatch. They also are very forest birds. They prefer larger, mature trees. You can see here, this guy's hanging out on the side of a tree. During the summer, they are insectivores, and they will try to, they prefer insects, but they will eat some seeds. During the winter, we can attract them to bird feeders with things like sunflower seeds, peanuts, suet, and peanut butter. So those are all things that they will eat. So they like a lot of high protein, as you can see. So sunflower, peanuts, peanut butter, all very high protein food for them. Winter wren, I talked about, so our summer wrens generally leave, but our winter wrens will move in. And they are this dark brown with darker barring on their wings. So you can see this barring pattern as you go down, and a little bit on their breast as well. They also prefer forested areas, and they make a lot of their dens or will utilize dead trees and areas that they can kind of have a safety place to hang out. They won't actually nest here, but they will migrate here for the winter. And if you want to attract these guys to the bird feeder, they like peanuts, mealworms, and suet blends. So that tends to be what they prefer to feed on throughout the winter. Downy woodpecker. This is one of our smaller woodpecker species. They are generally insectivores. They're mostly black with this red spot that you see on the back of their head. They are very common in our open woodland. So if you live in like a established neighborhood that has a fairly good tree population, they also really like to be in urban areas. They're, again, pretty common bird feeders, birds that we find at the bird feeders. They are insectivores most of the time, but they will come and feed on suet feeders, and they really love black oil sunflower seeds. So those are the two big things that will bring them into feeders during the winter. Eastern phoebe, this is one of our resident birds, so they stay throughout the summer and winter, but they are kind of a plumper songbird, and they have this grayish brown color to them with a darker head and a white belly. They will sometimes, you can see here, this is laying flat, but they will sometimes raise those head feathers into a peak, so it will look like they have a tuft on top. They also have a pretty distinct call. It sounds like they're saying phoebe when they make their call. They usually hang out in the lower, like understory trees and along fence lines. They're also an insectivore, but will eat small fruits and seeds as well. Many of our birds kind of have these varied, they're opportunists, whatever's available is what they will eat. So these they'll enjoy any type of seeds at the bird feeder, small fruits. If you put out, this is another one that if you do kind of like dried orange rings, they'll eat that. So pretty much, again, opportunists that come to most things at the feeder. Blue jay, these guys you may or may not want at the bird feeder, so they can be a little bit of bullies at the bird feeder, but they are very beautiful with their bright blue colors and prominent crest. They prefer oak trees because they actually will eat acorns. So particularly some of our smaller species of acorn, like pin oak, or some of the red oaks are a little bit smaller acorns to them, but they'll also eat white oak acorns. So they really, if you have a lot of oaks around your yard or your house, that usually attracts them. So I had some pecans that were left over from, they'd been in my car from a while from a demonstration I had. And so I started feeding those out in our yard. I was thinking I was feeding the squirrels, but actually the blue jays were taking those pecans as well. So they were native pecans, had been grown in Missouri, so they were a little bit on the smaller side. But yeah, they made use of those as well. so they again will eat a lot of different things, and they do sometimes bully at the bird feeder, but they are pretty fun to watch. This one is another one that I'm very fond of, which is tufted titmice or tufted titmouse. It has a very distinctive kind of brushy crest to it, and they're a grayish color on their top with kind of a rustier peach colored wash to their belly. They like deciduous woods with a pretty heavy canopy, but I have found I won't even say at my feeder, because these guys really like to eat leftover dog food or mostly leftover dog food. So if our dogs don't eat all of their food, these guys will move in very quickly and take advantage of that. But generally they eat insects in the summer, and then they'll move on to seeds, nuts, and berries in the winter. They're pretty common at the bird feeder. They tend to be, again, this species of bird tends to be a lot less timid than other species, so they don't seem to be as afraid of us as some of the other species that we have. Another nuthatch, I feel like we talked about this, so I'm going to skip it because I think I already talked about white-breasted nuthatch. Okay, black-capped Carolina chickadee. These guys are residents that we have throughout, but they have a black cap. Imagine that. So they have a black top to their head with these white cheeks, and then they also have this black kind of beard or throat, and then they kind of turn to a grayish color. They are, again, fairly common in forest areas or suburban urban areas that have established trees in them, and they can use a half plant, half insect diet during the winter. So if they can find insects, they will utilize them. So like right now, we still have quite a few insects that are out and about because we haven't had a lot of extensive cold yet. So they'll stick with their insect diet and then move on to seeds and other plant pieces during the deep winter. These guys readily use bird feeders, so they really are, again, pretty opportunistic when it comes to eating, and a pretty common sight at the bird feeder. The next one's eastern towhee. So this one's in the sparrow family, and it has very distinct male and female plumage. So if you look up here at the top, this is a female with a more drabber brown coloring to her, and this is a male. You can also see the female, it's not super clear, but this one shows like a darkish brown eye, and our males actually have a very distinct red eye to them. And these guys spend most of their time actually on the ground. So they like protective brushy cover to provide them kind of protection from predators. And that's where, so if you have a bird feeder out, they'll utilize those feeders that are closer to the ground and closer to shrubbier areas. But they're seed, fruit, and insect eaters. They'll also eat in the spring soft leaf and flower buds. So if we think about, they eat a lot of like elm buds. It's pretty common for them to be up in an elm tree eating those elm buds in the spring. And they have a call that sounds kind of like they're saying, drink your tea. And so, again, kind of a distinct bird that we have in Missouri. White-throated sparrow, another common one through our winter bird feeding. So it's again in the sparrow family, pretty plump bird. And they have this face pattern that's black and white crown stripe. So here's the black stripe and a white stripe. And then they have this little bit of yellow just above their eye and behind their bill. They do have a white throat patch on their gray face and breast. So you can also see below his beak, he's got this white patch of feathers. They eat seeds and of grasses and weeds year round. So these guys tend to be more in grassy areas. So native prairie or pasture is where we'll find most of them, but they do readily use those bird feeders, especially ones that have millet and the black oil sunflower seeds in them. And then just, I should play these sounds for you, but they have a very thin whistle. So in Oh Sweet Canada, Canada is what it sounds like. Our old Sam Peabody, Peabody is what it sounds like. So the next one's a dark-eyed junco, another very, again, common bird feeder site. It's in the sparrow family. If you look at its kind of body shape and size, it looks similar to those two other sparrows we just looked at. Rounder head, a longish tail, and they tend to be this kind of a granite gray color and with a white chest. And these guys are seed eaters. So they love millet. So if you have millet, which is a pretty common feed in kind of our mixed bird feeds, that is what they will eat the most of. They have kind of an even musical trill if you're listening for them, or short trip notes. So they will, if they're singing, they'll have kind of that musical trill, or if they're kind of just making noises, it'll be very short, trippy notes. Tips for birding, and I did leave out some common ones. So cardinals are another common sight at the bird feeder this time of year, and some other species of woodpeckers. But tips for birding is to be a good listener. Particularly, most of our birds tend to sing a little bit more, make a little bit more noise earlier in the morning. So getting up early is if you're looking to bird, getting up early is a good time to see more species. Practice, so looking and observing and practicing your observation skills are good ways to be a good birder. Take time to observe. Like I said, it's very interesting to see when certain birds show up. If they have preferences of food, it's always fun to see who prefers what. I do get a little frustrated with some of my birds because they'll sometimes kick the seeds they don't like to the ground, and then I'll end up with a lot of like kind of weedy millet underneath bird feeders because it ended up propagating itself underneath there. So that can so it's interesting to see what they prefer. Get involved. So there is an Audubon Society of Missouri. They do a lot of bird watching trips. So if you're interested in seeing different birds, they'll do trips around to different natural areas and conservation areas and forests to do birding trips. And then you can use your online resources. So I love the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's All About Birds. It has pictures upon pictures of different species. You can click on the calls and listen to the bird calls. It also has advice for if what certain species eat, if you're trying to attract those to bird feeders or to your yard. And then it's just, have fun. So birds are, we get to see a lot of different species of birds, which is really fun compared to some of our other winter animal watching. We usually get to see a lot of birds. So one thing you can do also that helps birds after, and I haven't included this yet because it feels so early for it, but if you have use a fresh Christmas tree or a live Christmas tree after you're done with it, putting that out in the yard for a little while provides a nice kind of shelter and area for birds to utilize. So then you drop it in the lake and it provides fish habitat. Here's if you're interested in any citizen science, the winter is a great time for citizen science bird projects. So one is the Christmas bird count. So this is by the Audubon Society, but this is the oldest ongoing citizen science project. And you can check out this website and it'll give you how to get involved with that. So that's pretty fun. I believe we have a training. So I'm in Phelps County. I know that everybody's kind of from all over the state, but various parts of the state, they have trainings to get you ready for that Christmas bird count. And there's also a program called Project Feeder Watch. And so this allows you to document your birds over a 5-month period each year, and you can sign up for that online. I believe there is a fee for that one, but they'll send you a bird feeder and all the information on how to do it. And then the Great Backyard Bird Count, that is in February. And that's another again, just citizen science opportunity, and you document the winter birds that are in your backyard and enter that information. So then these websites I'll send out with the recording when I send out the recording. So if you are interested in signing up or participating in any of them, you'll have that information. Any questions today?
I just wanted to say that the Feeder Watch project, that starts November 23rd. So that's
Okay.
like coming up.
Yep, so you're gonna sign up for that one. Sign up soon.
A friend of mine does eagle nest watching too in the winter.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I should talk about them in the winter too, because it's a good time to see eagles in Missouri, because we have more that migrate here. Is there a citizen science for eagle nest watching as well, Amanda?
I think so. I'm not for sure.
Okay. And I know our lake area master naturalists, I'm not sure if they'll have it back this year, but they do some eagle watching trips up around Lake of the Ozarks. And MDC usually has also eagle days come like January, February. So, but again, just kind of reminder, it's good to keep things that the birds use all the time, keep those clean. They, had issues with birds kind of dying of that mystery disease. Still haven't really seen what was causing it, but they have taken down those recommendations not to feed birds. And feeding the birds does help them, particularly when we hit January and February and we hit those really deep cold spells, especially for some of the ones that are kind of like insect feed eaters. When we hit those really prolonged cold spells, the insects are a lot less active and they're not going to find much to eat on. And by the time we get to January and February, much of those winter seeds have been utilized. So a lot of like the, dogwood seeds have been eaten. The flower, any of the flower seeds we've left behind. That's one of the benefits of kind of thinking about having plants that flower throughout the summer. It also provides us with food sources as we get later into the winter. So I know that my coneflowers, for example, most of the coneflower seed has been utilized by birds, but my asters just kind of recently quit flowering, so there's still some seed source that's available there for birds to eat on. So they're still getting stuff from the garden, but as we get deeper into the winter, they do have a little bit less to choose from. So if we can keep bird feeders out for those times in particular, that provides them a good winter food source. Cover is also good to provide them, places that they can take shelter from winter storms and winter cold, also beneficial for our birds. Any other questions about birds today? Yeah, I know there's also one of these days I'll also include like the ducks and geese on some of our winter residents. So many of the ducks and geese are migrating across Missouri right now. So if you're an avid bird watcher, this is a good time to see some of those birds that are migrating through. But Mary asked about, I promise with raccoons and have to take in all the feeders at night. Yes, that is sometimes the unfortunate thing is we're not only feeding birds, we're feeding any other folks around. So raccoons, unfortunately, there's not a great way to deter them. If they know that there's a meal that's available, they usually come regularly. I actually happen to live in a state park, and our nature center feeds, and they have a raccoon that visits pretty much every night. So bringing them in at night is pretty much the only option to deter those raccoons. So, and sometimes you'll never know who shows up at a bird feeder. I actually have some clients that they put in kind of native, a native planting, so grasses plus forbs, and they had quail that came out of kind of their native grass and came up to the bird feeder and were eating at the bird feeder. So you just never know who will pop up. But for the nuisance that pop up, most of them come at night, and the best solution is to take it in at night. Oh, yep, increased activity at the feeders, and house finches love the safflower. Good, thank you. Chickadees too, yes, yep. So we try to put up, and again, if you're trying to get a diversity of species, having different types of feeders and different food sources is really great. So we try to use kind of a combination of suet feeders and other kind of traditional bird feeders. And then, of course, providing, if you're looking for activities for kids to do, making kind of homemade bird feeders is always fun as well. So you can use kind of the pine cone with peanut butter and bird seed method. But there's also a variety of other types of feeders that you can make with kids that are kind of fun and last through the winter. Say we did, I didn't have pine cones, but we used paper plates to do a peanut butter bird seed, and they were picked clean within a day or two last in January when it was pretty cold. So they certainly utilize what they can. Oh, hot flavor to deter raccoons and squirrels. Does that work, do you think? I have also seen sour apple spray, but I have not had a lot of luck with that. But perhaps, okay, good. And then my parents have had issues with deer eating out of their bird feeders. So they actually will pull their bird feeders in. They've also started feeding it a little bit higher. So they've kind of rigged up with one of their bigger trees, a system, kind of a pulley system. So their bird feeders are on a pulley and they can let it down to refill, but then it's up pretty high. So it's out of reach from deer. Good. Oh, good. And you probably find those at any like farm store that has bird seed. Bird's eye view, Jeff City, and Payway feed. Very good. Thank you for that. That's good advice. So I know that also we feed the squirrels at our house. So we do provide them usually with the corn that's on like kind of a corn cob feeder. But not everybody likes the squirrels because they do sometimes get into our other feeders and they can cause damage. I've had squirrels actually eat through wooden bird feeders. So those hot seeds might be a good way to deter them. Very good. Oh, good. Do suet, but the no milk kind, just the hot suet. Good. Good. We do a lot of suet at our house. It goes pretty fast. Oh, yeah, the no milk kind. Good. Good to know. Lots of good advice. Okay, any other questions? Just a reminder, next week, we will also have the lunch and learn from noon to 1 on Tuesday. Next week, we'll be talking about winter wildlife IDs. So we're gonna talk about our critters that stay active during the winter. We'll talk about track ID and some other signs of wildlife. It's, sometimes the best wildlife viewing is in the winter because our forests are a lot more open and there's not as much understory and foliage. so it's a little bit easier for viewing. And I certainly prefer winter in the woods to summer in the woods, so it's a good time to be out there, kind of scoping out what's out there. So we'll talk about winter wildlife identification, and then we'll meet the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and we will talk about tree pruning. So this winter in the dormant season is a good time if you're going to prune any of your trees. It's a good time to prune them because they are in their dormancy and the insects are a lot fewer, so there's less likely to be insects attracted to those damaged, when we prune those open areas on the trees, and less likely to be any type of disease growth. And then November 30th, I'll give you kind of a sneak peek into the Missouri Christmas tree industry. So Missouri does have a pretty healthy Christmas tree growing industry. One more question. What's the best food to put out for crows, or will they come to a feeder? So crows they'll come to the feeder sometimes, but they're not, they like larger like peanuts and such, but they also will feed throughout the winter, and not something you want to put out at the feeder, but they'll feed on a lot of like roadkill and other, they'll tend to be meat eaters from time to time, but they will come sometimes for things like peanuts or other larger food sources. Yep. Oh, and corn. Crows will also come for corn. It's another good one that they will be attracted to. But I have had a harder time getting them to come to a feeder. They tend to be attracted more to, like, if it's spread on the ground a little further from the house. They seem to be a little more skittish. All right. Well, I will see everyone next Tuesday. I hope everyone has a good week. I think we're supposed to get out and enjoy the weather right now, because it looks like it's going to cool off quite a bit for the weekend, which might be a good thing if you're a deer hunter. That cooler weather is always a little bit nicer when you're in the woods. But yep. So everyone have a great day. Thank you.